All right. Welcome to Sifting Through the Rubble. This is our second session looking at the curriculum and the framework of the curriculum here at Memorial Lutheran School. Last time, we talked about the ends, or the teloi, of classical Lutheran education. And we listed them as 5 that a student here at Memorial Lutheran School ought to be wise unto salvation, have a masterful command of language, be a lifelong and well-rounded student who discerns with sound reason for the purpose of vocation, that is, for the purpose of serving the neighbor in love as God would have it. That those are the 5 ends, a 5-fold end, as we said last time, for an education here. And it's difficult to simply start there and say, well, that's what the education should be. There needs to be a means by which one achieves the end. And so today we're going to talk about the principles that govern the different subjects, so to speak. And there are 4 principles that we have here which work towards these ends. We're going to use the Latin word for them and then also the English equivalent. So the first of the principles is fides, which is the Latin word for faith, which corresponds directly to wise unto salvation. The second is the plural artes, which are the liberal and fine arts. The liberal arts consisting of the Trivium, or language arts, and the Quadrivium, mathematical arts, and then the fine arts of music in its practical form, as opposed to theoretical, as well as art and in the studio sense, drawing, painting, sculpting, and one could include drama, dance, which we don't have, but certainly could support, and that kind of thing. So those arts go towards the masterful command of language. So we'll draw that. Next. Then the third principle is the Latin word scientia. Scientia is the word for knowledge, where we get the English word science from the Latin word scio. And here we would fit all subjects of knowledge and understanding. The humanities fit under here in terms of literature, history, theology, as apart from sort of twofold. Right? Theology not only fits in fides, developing faith and wise unto salvation, but also theology as knowing when it comes to applying theology, either in history or in dogmatics. Also logic and rhetoric, gymnastic and mathematical reasoning. All of these things are kept underneath this heading of Skientia. So Skientia fits both the lifelong and well-rounded student and discerning with vocation. Then, lastly, the final principle would be that of caritas, which is the Latin word for love. We get charity, and old translations of Augustine and others will use charity, faith, hope, and charity. So this is the catechetical and moral formation. We'll actually do a little bit more breaking down here in just a minute. in terms of how the principles get to the ends. But what I want to do is pause just for a brief moment and see if anybody has a question about these principles of fides, artes, scientia, and caritas, and how they work their way towards a student being wise into salvation, having a masterful command of language, lifelong well-rounded student who discerns with sound reason for the purpose of vocation. Are there any questions that arise from the principles to the ends? Anything? Okay, then let's look at the subsets. So when we're talking about fides, about faith, the main way in which we teach the faith is the good old-fashioned word catechesis. This essentially is a preset, a prequel, if you will, to the week we come back from Thanksgiving when we'll talk about the curriculum. But we'll start with the overarching issues of the curriculum, and then we can go into the fine details that week on the 3rd. So rather not the 3rd, the 10th, because the 3rd is coffee with the headmaster. So 4th rather, the 4th is coffee with the headmaster. So catechesis is the way that the faith is taught, bringing a child to be wise unto salvation. Catechesis is done with the catechism. It is also done with the liturgy in chapel. It is done with hymns. It is done with Bible stories. It gives students a firm foundation in what the faith is and who faith is in. There's 2 traditional ways of talking about faith when it comes to theology. There's the fides qua creditur. This will be a heavy Latin session, but that's okay. And the fides quae creditur. Fides, I've already introduced, is the word that means faith. Creditur is the verb is believed. It's a passive. So the faith that is believed is fides and creditur. This word qua is the relative pronoun. So the first one, the fides qua creditur, is the faith by which one believes. And the fides quae creditur is the faith which is believed. So you have the faith by which one believes and the faith which is believed. The Holy Spirit grants the faith by which one believes. This is faith as sort of substance. Right? That we are given faith in baptism. We are given faith through hearing the word. And then if you think of that faith as an arm or as a container or a sack, the fides quae creditur, the faith which is believed, that's the stuff that fills faith. So what do you believe? This is done through the creed. This is done through the catechism. This is done through the Bible. And so we have faith 2 ways, right? The arm that God builds, faith, and then what the hand holds, right? What you believe with, and then what you believe. So that faith is crafted from the very early ages, the 2s, preschool and pre-K, and kindergarten. It's crafted by hymns. It is crafted by the use of Bible stories. It is crafted by the use of the liturgy and the basics of the catechism, so that not only is faith received by the working of the Holy Spirit when the scriptures are read and when preaching is heard, when baptism is administered, but also that faith is brought up and that faith is joined to knowledge. Matthew 28, 19 and 20 tells us not only that we are to go and make disciples of all nations by baptizing, but also by teaching. So you can see the faith by which, that's the baptism, and the faith which is believed, that's the teaching that fills in that sack or container that God provides for humanity. So that's the first one. That's fides, that matches wise into salvation. Then we have the arts, the artes, the liberal and the fine arts, the trivium and the quadrivium. Oftentimes, the trivium and quadrivium are used, well, the trivium anyway, is used as a metaphor for learning, which is a perfectly fine metaphor, but it's where one has the grammar stage and the logic stage and the rhetoric stage, but that's just a metaphorical use. The trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric are the language arts, or the skills for language, which students need to have at their fingertips. They have to have a masterful command of them. We teach them by means of phonics, of handwriting, of reading, of spelling, of writing. All of the Latin also teaches grammar. And when grammar was spoken of in the ancient trivium, that's all it meant, was Latin. And it didn't just mean sorting through the grammar like one would do sort of systematically. These are nouns, these are verbs, but it meant reading and then analyzing the grammar of the texts, the poetry, of the literature that one was reading. So we have the trivium. Quadrivium, lesser known than the trivium in the classical revival, the quadrivium are the mathematical arts of arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. Number in time, number in space, and number in space and time. Numbers are a language, a way of communicating idea. And so this mathematical set of skills is very important for students to have. We believe in the whole education, which is both sort of for the English and for the math side of things, which provides the arts and the skills that one needs to communicate well the knowledge that one has. So you have the arts of the liberal arts, right? Called liberal because they free the mind and the soul to pursue good, true, and beautiful things, not just to work in a menial sense, but to work in a free sense. Ties that to vocation. And of course, the fine arts in the ancient world, and especially in the medieval and the Renaissance, music was thought of as two different ways. There was theoretica and practica. There was music as theory, as number, and music as performed. And we maintained that to a certain extent with our emphasis on the instrumental music, and then and choir on the one hand, and music theory, which we give all of our students on the other, that provides them the ability to be able to think through the language of the music when it comes to note duration or sound or timbre, pitch, solfege scales, the whole 9 yards there. So we have the trivium and the quadrivium, as well as the fine arts that develop the language of the student. Then we get to the fields of Skientia, of knowledge and understanding. Now, this word Skientia, like I said, the Latin predecessor of the word science. Science for us has a very particular meaning, and these subjects we would fit under Skientia are not necessarily science in that contemporary and so-called traditional sense. What we would put under knowledge would include the studies of the humanities. In the Renaissance, there was this drive to recover the studia humanitatis, the studies of humanity. And these are literature, history, philosophy. We would fit geography under here. We would include the history of music and of art and of architecture under these things. This is where the knowledge and understanding of what life is like for humanity and has been, where all of that culminates. This ties directly to teaching morals, teaching character, teaching virtue, but it also teaches how we interact with humanity, what humanity was, what it is, how we learn more about ourselves is by studying literature history and theology to do that. So the traditional sciences, as people think about them, the natural sciences, biology, the physical sciences, those fit either really under the quadrivium or under another sub-branch that we distinguish here under Skientia, not an arrow, but under the gymnastic. So in certain discussions of classical education, gymnastic is used to talk about the body. And natural philosophy used to cover biology. Aristotle wrote on biology. So we stick biology, PE, and sports under this heading of the gymnastic, which also is a field of knowledge that is important for our students to have. The last field of knowledge would be one of mathematical reasoning and scientific reasoning, for that matter. So here one fits the higher maths of calculus and the science of physics, as apart from the quadrivium, which really is looking at math as arithmetic and algebra. Mathematical reasoning is a bit more advanced and would fit more as a field of knowledge and understanding, driving us towards discerning with sound reasoning. And also, like I said, one could add here scientific reasoning. That is not only the subject matter that would fit with math or with astronomy, with earth science, but also the way in which one thinks about science, right? How do we gain the information that we are using for the purpose of our experiments and our theories? How do we observe? How do we think about these things? So scientific reasoning and mathematical reasoning are part and parcel to a student's knowledge and his understanding of things, which drives to that fourth end, which is the discerning with sound reason. Now, one of the crossroads you'll see is that logic, which belongs to the trivium, doesn't necessarily end up with discerning with sound reason, but we use logic as a skill from the liberal arts to color and fill out the fields of knowledge and understanding under Scientia. All right, so those are the first three of the principles. The last is caritas, which is love. And love is developed, first of all, by faith, right? God's love and the faith that comes from the work of the Holy Spirit. This produces a love that is selfless, a love that desires the other, a love that is not self-centered. And we have this little paragraph underneath the lower school for catechetical and moral formation. I'll put that under caritas here, and then I'll read you this paragraph. Catechetical and moral formation. Through literature, poetry, and history and theology, students are formed to think about their lives in view of others. An intentional focus is given toward the Christian life and the place of the cardinal and theological virtues in the Christian life. The curriculum of each grade builds upon what was taught in previous years to bring students to the brink of discussing these issues in treatments of the great books in the upper school. So the principle of caritas is taught, again, like Scientia, through theology, through literature, through the examination of the great books, through history and philosophy. Here, love for the other is formed, it is molded, it is cultivated, so that all of these things, one's faith, one's command of the arts, one's knowledge, and one's love, can be used for the purpose of taking care of the neighbor. That is how our principles find their ends in the fivefold teloi of a classical Lutheran education. All right, there's a few minutes left. If there's any questions or reflections on how these principles make their way to the ends, if anything sounds like it's missing, it's important, I think, for us to have a comprehensive way of looking at the curriculum both the unwritten and written curriculum of the school. We worked on this over the summer as a faculty small group to develop a comprehensive and clear way of talking about what does the curriculum look like at Memorial Lutheran School. So questions, reflections, gaps. Anything at all. Tom.
Yeah, I'll give just a first one. I was a little surprised that there was not an arrow from the Artes to lifelong and well-rounded student, the same as Scientia has. Is there anything that you could is there a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could do that. Because one needs language in order to talk about knowledge. The issue is when you're looking at a spreadsheet, how do I, take the two on the one hand and split them across the three on the other?
Right.
I think you could easily make an argument, right, that maybe we would even go like this, where we would say, you follow this arrow across from the Artes to the Masterful Command of Language, and then it goes down like that into the lifelong and well-rounded student, because I think that it is this focus on a masterful command of language. As much as it's fun and important to introduce children to the basics of science and history at early stages, until they have a fluency with reading, with thinking through concepts, they're not really ready to do the knowledge part the same way that a student 5th grade on up, or certainly 9th grade on up, does. So we work on developing that strong language base, whether it be English, Latin, or math, for the purpose of filling in those categories. So I think that would be my argument to that. The arrow goes over there, apart from just the physical confines of Excel.
Well, so it's also helpful to think of the way you also described the teloi as a 5-fold end, yes, singular, because you could, once you draw arrows between those, you could have a lot more to say.
Yep.
Which was last week.
Yes, they're all interconnected. I mean, you can't, knowledge is universal. It is one thing with variations within it, as opposed to many different things. And we try very hard to hand over that universal knowledge, that interconnected knowledge to our students, which makes the ends interconnected and to a certain extent makes the principles interconnected. You can always make distinctions from one to the other, but one finds that you end up drawing so many different Venn diagrams because of all the overlapping from one to the next. And it's good that they overlap, because it means that that there's an internal consistency between the ends and the principles. Other things that come to mind. That don't.
It's very helpful to hear the distinction between fides qua and fides quae.
Well, have you heard that before?
I might have heard it in some other classes at Memorial Church, but it's helpful to see it here. And it's interesting how both of those are a gift, yet they're passed on through catechesis.
Yes.
So it's kind of like overall what you do, but also just to remember that both of those were a gift.
Yes. Yeah, I think the twofold nature of faith, we don't talk an awful lot about faith. It's not a major topic. It's not an article in the Augsburg Confession. It doesn't really stand out on its own. The dogmaticians will expound upon it because it does need to be clarified. And with the modern heresies in like the word faith movement and the way that faith gets used, right, sort of randomly or arbitrarily, right? You have Billy Joel's song, Keeping the Faith. You have
Yes.
phrases, right? Like that. You just need to keep the faith. Well, what does that even mean? Right? So for the Christian, not even just for a discussion on curricula or catechesis, but for the Christian, it's important to have that twofold definition handy. I was first introduced to it college in a discussion of Lutheran principles, the fides qua and the fides quae. And then since learning Latin, it makes a whole lot more sense to me, because this qua here is by means of, it's a ablative of means, which I just went over with my 7th grade Latin students. So the fides by which one believes, and we use qua sometimes in English. Have you heard of the sine qua non? Right, without by which there is not. So there's a number of ways, and the word quorum comes from the same word. Quorum literally means of whose, but when we look for a quorum, it's from that relative pronoun in Latin. So, yeah, I like the fides discussion, and it matches well to catechesis.
Yeah,
It's all passive in terms of, right, God's giving you the container or the arm, and God's filling it up. And it's good for us to be able to identify what God puts in the hand of faith.
and it's on the opposite end from caritas, where we are learning then to go and serve.
Yes.
And so for the school, it's interesting that you have everything in between those two.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you like the arts and sciences are sort of cradled by faith and love. And to a certain extent, I guess you could say that those two can be kept encapsulated by hope, because one is waiting for the end by living in those things, right? You're living with the skills and the knowledge based upon the faith one has in Jesus for the sake of love for the neighbor while you're waiting for the last day. So you could do that if you wanted to. This would make their church fathers happy, because they like symbolism. The more layers we can put on words, the prouder they become.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think these things are very difficult to map out, because there will always be more discussion. So this was good.
Well, I think I'm going to call it, right. So you got 4 principles. That's the Gospels. And then you got 5 ends, and that's the Torah. So at least we can.
Those numbers are okay.
They're all right. It'd be nice. It would have been nicer. I mean, 9 is not a helpful number. 7's complete, which is why the liberal arts probably stayed at 7 and didn't expand. Architecture and medicine used to be included in the liberal arts, and then they got kicked out. But you can do 9 for the muses, and that could make us classical, drawing on the. And otherwise, we got to add 3 more to get to 12. So the numerology can. I'm glad we've. On the one hand, it's really nice, and on the other hand, I'm glad that we're not as. If you want numerology in spades, you should read Augustine's sermons. Every time a number comes up, he will tell you something about that number. The 2 donkeys of Palm Sunday, Advent 1, that's the Old and the New Testament. He just finds any 2s he'll pull out, any 5s he'll pull out, over and over. All right. Well, other thoughts about the principles and ends of an education? Then we'll close for now, and then next time, after Coffee with the Headmaster, after Thanksgiving, we'll fill in the gaps with some of the courses that we teach, the texts that we use, and some more of the fleshing out of things, and then prepare for. And I need to send an email to our families and friends here for questions and topics to present in the last one right before Christmas. So that's all for now. Thanks for coming. And we'll see you after Thanksgiving. Have a happy Thanksgiving and a blessed first Sunday in Advent, which occurs next Sunday, not this upcoming. All right, very good.